I never thought my neighbor would try to destroy my life over $300,000. But here I was, staring at an accusation letter claiming I had embezzled the entire annual budget of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association in Gilbert, Arizona. My name is Ethan Lancaster, and I had been living in this planned community for 8 years. I moved here after my divorce, looking for a fresh start in a quiet neighborhood where I could focus on my consulting business and maybe get to know some decent people. The irony was not lost on me that the person I trusted most in this community would become the one who nearly sent me to prison. It started on a Tuesday morning in March 2025. I was drinking coffee on my back patio, reviewing some client contracts when my doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures in uniform. My stomach dropped before I even opened the door. "Ethan Lancaster?" the taller officer asked. "That's me." "I'm Officer Rodriguez. This is Officer Chen. We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions regarding financial irregularities with your homeowners association." "Financial irregularities? I'm just a resident. I'd pay my dues like everyone else." Officer Rodriguez pulled out a folded document. "According to the complaint filed by your HOA president, Rebecca Hutchins, you were the treasurer until last month, and there's a significant amount of money missing from the association accounts." My mind went blank. That's impossible. I resigned as treasurer in February, but the accounts were completely in order. I have all the records. "That's what we'd like to discuss. You're not under arrest, but we need your cooperation." I grabbed my wallet and phone, my hands shaking slightly as I locked the door behind me. The ride to the Gilbert Police Department felt surreal. I kept replaying the past few months in my mind, trying to figure out what could have possibly gone wrong. I had volunteered as treasurer 2 years ago, mostly because no one else wanted the job. It was tedious work, tracking dues payments, managing vendors for landscaping and pool maintenance, and making sure our reserve fund stayed healthy. Rebecca Hutchins had become HOA president about 18 months ago. She was a 52-year-old real estate agent with blonde highlights that were always perfectly done and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. At first, she seemed competent and organized, if a bit controlling. At the station, they led me to a small interrogation room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the metal chair scraped against the floor as I sat down. Detective Sarah Morrison entered a few minutes later, carrying a thick folder. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "Mr. Lancaster, thank you for coming in. I want to be clear that you're free to leave at any time, and you have the right to an attorney." "I don't need an attorney because I haven't done anything wrong." "I hope that's true." She opened the folder and spread out several printed bank statements. "Can you explain why the Riverside Meadows HOA account shows a balance of $47,000 when it should have over $350,000? I leaned forward, scanning the statements. The account number was correct, but the transactions made no sense. There were dozens of transfers I had never authorized, checks written to companies I didn't recognize, and wire transfers to accounts I had never seen before. "This is wrong. These transactions, I never made them. Look at the dates. Most of these are from the past 6 weeks, and I resigned as treasurer on February 10th. I handed everything over to Rebecca." Detective Morrison pulled out another document. "According to Mrs. Hutchins, you refused to provide proper documentation during the transition. She claims she only discovered the missing funds last week when she finally gained full access to the accounts." "That's a complete lie. I gave her everything. Account numbers, passwords, checkbooks, every receipt and invoice for the past 2 years. I even created a detailed spreadsheet showing every transaction." "Do you have proof of that?" "I have emails. I have copies of everything. It's all on my computer at home." Detective Morrison studied me for a long moment. "Mrs. Hutchins has provided us with forged check signatures that match your handwriting. She has transfer records that allegedly come from your computer's IP address. She has witness statements from other board members saying you were acting secretive and defensive in the months before your resignation." My chest tightened. "Who are these board members?" "Patricia Davis, the vice president, and Martin Shaw, the secretary." I knew both of them. Patricia was Rebecca's best friend, always agreeing with whatever Rebecca said during meetings. Martin was a retired accountant who mostly stayed quiet, but seemed to defer to Rebecca on every decision. Detective, I'm being set up. I don't know why, but Rebecca is lying. Everything she's told you is fabricated. Then you won't mind if we examine your computer and financial records? Not at all. I want you to. I have nothing to hide. She nodded slowly. We'll need to get a warrant for that. In the meantime, I'd suggest you get a lawyer. These are serious allegations, Mr. Lancaster. If the district attorney decides to file charges, you could be looking at multiple felonies. They let me go after taking my statement. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through possibilities. Why would Rebecca do this? We had worked together for over a year without any major conflicts. Sure, she could be pushy and micromanaging, but I never imagined she was capable of theft and fraud. When I got home, I immediately opened my laptop and started pulling up files. Every transaction I had made as treasurer was documented. I had bank statements, canceled checks, invoices, receipts, and email confirmations. I had been meticulous because I knew how contentious HOA finances could be. As I dug through the files, I started to notice something strange. In December, Rebecca had asked me to add her as a signatory on the accounts. She claimed it was for emergency purposes, in case something happened to me and the association needed immediate access to funds. It seemed reasonable at the time, so I had gone to the bank with her and filled out the paperwork. That was the key. She had legitimate access to the accounts. She could have made all those fraudulent transactions herself after I resigned. I started compiling evidence. I downloaded every bank statement from the HOA account, going back 3 years. I pulled up my personal bank statements to prove I hadn't deposited any unusual amounts. I gathered all the emails between Rebecca and me, especially the ones from February where I detailed the transition process. The smoking gun was in a folder I had almost forgotten about. When I resigned, I had requested a full account audit from the bank, just to protect myself. The bank had sent me a certified statement as of February 10, 2025, showing the account balance was $347,812. Every penny accounted for. My hands were shaking as I printed out the document. This proved the money was there when I left. Whatever happened after that was entirely Rebecca's responsibility. I called a lawyer the next morning. His name was Douglas Freeman, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar cases. His office was in downtown Phoenix, a 30-minute drive from Gilbert. Douglas was in his early 60s with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened to my entire story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "You have good documentation," he said when I finished. "This bank statement from February is crucial. It establishes that the funds were intact when you transferred responsibility. The question is, what was Rebecca's motive?" "I have no idea. We never had any personal conflicts. The HOA was running smoothly." There's always a motive in fraud cases. Usually it's financial desperation, gambling debts, medical bills, lifestyle maintenance. We need to dig into her background. How do we do that? I have an investigator I work with. Let me make some calls. In the meantime, don't talk to anyone from the HOA. Don't post anything on social media. And if the police contact you again, don't answer any questions without me present. I left his office feeling slightly better, but the weight of the situation was crushing. That evening, I got a call from my neighbor, Tom Richardson. He lived 3 houses down and had always been friendly. "Ethan, man, I just heard what's going on. Rebecca sent out an email to the whole community saying you stole the HOA funds. People are losing their minds." "She what?" "Yeah, she called an emergency meeting tomorrow night. She's telling everyone that the association is basically broke because of you, and we might have to do a special assessment to cover the shortfall." Anger flooded through me. She was not just trying to frame me for her crime, she was actively destroying my reputation. "Tom, I didn't take anything. I have proof that the money was there when I left the position. Rebecca is the one who stole it." "I believe you, man. You've always been straight with everyone. But a lot of people are buying her story. You should come to the meeting and defend yourself." My lawyer told me not to engage. "I get it, but if you don't show up, people are going to assume you're guilty." He had a point. I called Douglas and explained the situation. "Normally I'd say stay away," he said. "But in a case like this, where your reputation in the community is at stake, it might be worth it. Just don't answer any direct questions about the finances. Let them know you're cooperating with the police and you have evidence proving your innocence." The next evening, I walked into the Riverside Meadows clubhouse with a knot in my stomach. The room was packed. At least 80 people had shown up, almost half the homeowners in our 200-unit community. The atmosphere was hostile. I could feel eyes on me, hear the whispers. Rebecca stood at the front of the room, next to Patricia and Martin. She looked calm and composed, wearing a navy blazer and pearl earrings. When she saw me, her expression didn't change, but I noticed her grip tighten on the folder she was holding. "Let's get started," Rebecca said, her voice carrying through the room. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. As you know from my email, we're facing a serious crisis. Our treasurer, or rather our former treasurer, Ethan Lancaster, has embezzled approximately $300,000 from our association accounts." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people turned to glare at me. "That's not true," I said loudly, standing up. "I didn't take anything." "Ethan, you'll have a chance to speak?" Rebecca said smoothly. "First, let me present the facts. When I took over as president 18 months ago, our reserve fund was healthy. We had plenty of money for ongoing maintenance and future projects. Over the past year, I noticed Ethan becoming increasingly secretive about the finances. He stopped providing detailed reports at board meetings. He refused to give me access to the bank accounts." "I provided reports at every meeting," I interrupted. "They're all in the public record." "Reports that were vague and incomplete," Patricia added, her arms crossed. "We asked for specifics and you always said you'd get back to us." "That's a lie," Rebecca held up her hand. "Please, let's keep this civil. After Ethan resigned in February, I finally gained access to the accounts. What I found was shocking. Hundreds of transactions to unknown vendors, wire transfers to offshore accounts, checks written to shell companies. The forensic accountant I hired has traced much of the missing money to accounts connected to Ethan." "Let me see that report," I demanded. "It's part of an ongoing criminal investigation. I can't share details publicly." "Convenient." An older woman in the front row stood up. Her name was Doris, and she had lived in the community for over 20 years. "Ethan, dear, if you didn't take the money, where is it?" "It's still in the account," I said, "or at least it was when I resigned. I have a certified bank statement from February 10th showing the balance was over $347,000. Whatever happened after that, Rebecca is responsible for." The room erupted in competing voices. Some people were defending me, others calling me a liar. Rebecca raised her voice. "That alleged bank statement is forged. Ethan has been preparing his defense for months. He knew he would eventually get caught." "It's not forged. It's certified by the bank. Anyone can verify it." "Then why don't you show it to us?" Martin challenged. I pulled out a copy from my jacket pocket and held it up. "Here, pass it around. Check the certification stamp, the account number, everything." Tom Richardson, sitting near the back, stood up. "I'd like to see it." I handed the document to the person next to me, and it made its way through the crowd. People studied it, pointing at different sections, whispering to each other. Rebecca's composure slipped slightly. "A piece of paper proves nothing. The police have evidence that Ethan accessed the accounts after his resignation and continued making fraudulent transfers. How could I access the accounts after I resigned? I gave you all the passwords. You could have kept backup access. You're a technology consultant. This is exactly the kind of thing you'd know how to do." "That's speculation. Show me one piece of actual evidence that I accessed anything after February 10th. Rebecca smiled tightly. "The evidence is with the police. I'm not at liberty to discuss it here." A man named George, who served on the Architectural Review Committee, raised his hand. "Rebecca, this is a serious accusation. If you're wrong, you're destroying this man's reputation. Maybe we should wait for the police investigation to conclude before we make any judgments." "We can't wait," Rebecca said. "Our association is in financial crisis. We need to do a special assessment immediately to cover the shortfall. Every homeowner will need to pay an additional $1,500 within 30 days. That got everyone's attention. Angry voices filled the room. $1,500 was a significant unexpected expense for many families. "I'm not paying a dime until we know what really happened," Tom said loudly. "Me neither," someone else agreed. Rebecca's face flushed. "If we don't replenish the reserve fund, we won't be able to pay our vendors. The landscaping will stop. The pool will close. We could face lines from contractors." "Then maybe you should explain where the money really went," I said. For a brief moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. I don't have to explain anything. I'm not the one under investigation for embezzlement. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People were arguing, demanding answers, questioning everything. Eventually, Rebecca called for order and suggested forming a special committee to oversee the financial investigation. Several people volunteered, including Tom and Doris. I left the meeting feeling slightly vindicated, but still anxious. The court of public opinion was divided, but at least some people were willing to consider my side. Over the next few days, Douglas's investigator, a former FBI agent named Marcus Webb, started digging into Rebecca's background. What he found was illuminating. Rebecca's real estate business was failing. In the past year, she had sold only 3 properties, and the Phoenix market had been tough. She was 2 months behind on her mortgage. Her credit cards were maxed out. She had taken out a personal loan from a private lender at an exorbitant interest rate. She needed money desperately, Marcus explained during a meeting at Douglas's office. I found records of her gambling at the Desert Diamond Casino. She's been there almost every weekend for the past 6 months. I talked to a dealer who knows her. He said she's been losing big. Can we prove she took the HOA money? I asked. That's harder. She's smart. The transactions she made from the HOA account went to various vendor accounts, some legitimate, some not. But here's the interesting part. Marcus pulled out a printout. 3 of the vendor accounts are connected to shell companies that trace back to her husband's business. Her husband? Dennis Hutchins. He owns a small landscaping company that's also struggling financially. 2 of the shell companies that received HOA payments are subsidiaries he created last year. The money went from the HOA account to these companies, and then it was transferred to personal accounts. Douglas leaned forward. That's our case. We can prove the money trail leads directly to Rebecca and her husband. The question is, will the police and the DA believe it? We need to present this to Detective Morrison, I said. I'll arrange a meeting. 3 days later, we sat in Detective Morrison's office, laying out everything we had found. She listened carefully, examining the documents Marcus had compiled. This is compelling, she admitted, but it's also complicated. Mrs. Hutchins has been very cooperative with our investigation. She's provided extensive documentation supporting her claims against you. Documentation that's fabricated, Douglas said. My client has bank records proving the account was fully funded when he resigned. Everything that happened after that is on Mrs. Hutchins. I'll need to verify these shell companies and the money trail, Detective Morrison said. If what you're saying is accurate, then yes, we've been investigating the wrong person. How long will that take? I asked. A few days, maybe a week. White-collar cases like this require careful analysis. I'll need to work with the fraud division and possibly the FBI if there's evidence of wire fraud. In the meantime, what happens to Ethan's reputation? Douglas asked. Mrs. Hutchins has been publicly accusing him of theft. That's a civil matter. If your client is cleared, he can pursue defamation charges. We left the police station with cautious optimism. Marcus continued investigating, and what he uncovered next was even more damning. Rebecca had been skimming money from the HOA for months, not just the large-scale theft that happened after I resigned. Marcus found evidence of inflated invoices, payments to non-existent vendors, and kickbacks from contractors. The total amount missing was closer to $400,000, not $300,000. She's been running a sophisticated fraud scheme, Marcus explained. She used her position as president to approve payments without proper oversight. Martin and Patricia were either complicit or willfully ignorant. We need to show this to the special committee, I said. Tom Richardson had been keeping me updated on the committee's work. They were struggling to make sense of the financial records because Rebecca kept deflecting and delaying their requests for information. I called Tom and asked him to arrange a private meeting with the committee members. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Gilbert, away from the community where Rebecca might have eyes and ears. There were 5 committee members: Tom, Doris, George, a woman named Linda, who worked as an accountant, and a younger guy named Jeff, who was an attorney. I presented everything Marcus had found, walking them through the money trail step by step. Linda asked detailed questions, cross-referencing the documents with the HOA's records. Jeff made notes about potential legal violations. This is fraud on a massive scale, Linda said quietly. "If this is accurate, Rebecca should be in prison." "We need to take this to the entire board," George said. "The board is compromised," Jeff pointed out. "Patricia and Martin have been supporting Rebecca's story. They might be involved. Then we need to call for a vote of no confidence and remove the entire board," Doris said firmly. "Can we do that?" Tom asked. Jeff nodded. "According to our bylaws, if 20% of homeowners petition for a special election, we can remove board members and elect new ones. It'll take a few weeks to organize, but it's possible." "Let's do it," I said. Over the next 2 weeks, the committee organized a petition drive. It wasn't easy. Rebecca had her supporters who believed her version of events, but as more people saw the evidence, opinions shifted. We gathered signatures from over 60% of homeowners, far more than required. Meanwhile, Detective Morrison completed her investigation. She called me on a Friday afternoon in early April. "Mr. Lancaster, I owe you an apology. Our forensic analysis confirms that the fraudulent transactions were made by Mrs. Hutchins, not you. We're preparing to file charges against her and her husband." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, Detective. We'll need your continued cooperation as a witness. The DA wants to move forward quickly because there's concern that the Hutchinses might try to flee or hide additional assets." "Whatever you need. We're executing search warrants on their home and business today. We're also freezing their bank accounts. If we can recover any of the stolen funds, they'll be returned to the HOA." The next morning, I watched from my front window as police cars pulled up to Rebecca's house 4 doors down. Officers in tactical gear surrounded the property. Rebecca and her husband were led out in handcuffs. Neighbors gathered on the street watching in stunned silence. My phone buzzed with text messages. Tom sent a simple message: "Justice." The special election happened 3 weeks later. Rebecca, Patricia, and Martin were removed from the board. New members were elected, including Linda as president and Jeff as treasurer. I declined to run for any position. I had learned my lesson about HOA politics. The criminal case moved forward. Rebecca and Dennis were charged with multiple felonies, including embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus's investigation, combined with the police forensic analysis, showed the complete money trail. Rebecca's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wanted to make an example of the case. HOA fraud was becoming increasingly common in Arizona, and prosecutors wanted to send a message. The trial took place in September 2025. I testified for 2 days, walking the jury through my time as treasurer and explaining how I had maintained meticulous records. The prosecution presented the certified bank statement from February, showing the account was fully funded when I resigned. They showed the fraudulent transactions that occurred after that date. They traced the money to the shell companies and ultimately to Rebecca and Dennis's personal accounts. The defense tried to argue that I had been complicit, that I had helped set up the shell companies. But they couldn't explain why I would have resigned just as the scheme was succeeding. They couldn't explain the bank statement. They couldn't explain why I had immediately provided all my records to the police. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Rebecca and Dennis guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Rebecca to 8 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay full restitution. Dennis got 6 years. They were also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The case made local news. Several reporters interviewed me, and I tried to use the attention to advocate for better oversight and transparency in HOA governance. And I talked about the importance of independent audits, mandatory financial training for board members, and stronger state regulations. The Riverside Meadows HOA eventually recovered most of the stolen money through asset seizures and insurance claims. The new board implemented strict financial controls, including quarterly audits and requiring dual signatures on all checks over $1,000. My reputation in the community was restored, though the whole experience left me wary. Several neighbors apologized for doubting me. Tom became a good friend, and we started playing golf together on weekends. I kept my consulting business going, but I also started volunteering with a nonprofit that advocated for HOA reform in Arizona. I testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger laws protecting homeowners and preventing fraud. The experience taught me several things. First, trust, but verify. I had trusted Rebecca because she seemed competent and professional, but I should have been more skeptical when she asked for signatory access to the accounts. Second, document everything. My meticulous record-keeping saved me from prison. Third, never underestimate the damage that one corrupt person can do when they're in a position of power. Looking back, I still get angry thinking about how close I came to being convicted for a crime I didn't commit. Rebecca had planned her scheme carefully, setting me up to take the fall. If I hadn't kept those bank records, if I hadn't requested that certified statement, my life would have been destroyed. But I also feel grateful. Grateful for the people like Tom and Doris who stood by me. Grateful for Douglas and Marcus who fought to uncover the truth. Grateful for a justice system that, despite its flaws, ultimately worked. My life returned to something resembling normal by early 2026. I was dating someone I met through a friend, a teacher named Sarah who had no interest in HOA politics. We talked about maybe buying a house together somewhere without an HOA. The Gilbert community still talked about the scandal. It had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that financial oversight matters and that corruption can happen anywhere, even in a suburban planned community with well-manicured lawns and friendly neighbors. I ran into Patricia at the grocery store one day. She avoided eye contact and hurried past me. I later heard she had moved out of Riverside Meadows, unable to face the shame of having supported Rebecca's lies. Martin also moved, relocating to Tucson to be closer to his daughter. The new HOA board was doing well. They published detailed financial reports every month. They held regular town halls where homeowners could ask questions. They hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations, removing the temptation for any one person to have too much control. I still lived in my house in Gilbert, still enjoyed the Arizona sunshine and the mountain views, but I was more careful now, more aware of the human capacity for deception and greed. One evening in May 2026, almost exactly a year after Rebecca's arrest, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Rebecca, written from the federal prison in Tucson where she was serving her sentence. The letter was strange. She didn't apologize exactly, but she tried to explain. She wrote about the pressure she felt to maintain appearances, to pretend her real estate business was thriving when it was failing. She wrote about her gambling addiction, how it started as a way to escape stress and became an all-consuming compulsion. She wrote about convincing herself that borrowing HOA money was temporary, that she would pay it back before anyone noticed. Then, when I announced my resignation as treasurer, she panicked. She had already taken too much. She couldn't pay it back. So she decided to pin everything on me, creating false records and fabricating evidence. She thought if she moved quickly enough, got out in front of the story, people would believe her instead of me. I never imagined you would have kept such detailed records, she wrote. I thought I could control the narrative. I was wrong, and now I'm paying the price. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that none of this was personal. I was desperate and made terrible choices. I'm sorry for what I put you through. I read the letter several times, trying to feel something other than anger. Eventually, I filed it away in a folder with all the other documents from the case. Maybe someday I would be able to forgive her, but that day hadn't arrived yet. Douglas called me a few weeks later with interesting news. Several other HOAs in the Phoenix area had contacted him, asking for advice on preventing fraud. They wanted to implement the same safeguards that Riverside Meadows had adopted after the scandal. You could make a real difference here, Douglas said. You've lived through this nightmare. You understand the vulnerabilities. Why don't you consider consulting with HOAs on financial oversight and fraud prevention? It was an intriguing idea. I had the expertise from my technology background, the credibility from surviving the false accusations, and the motivation to prevent others from experiencing what I went through. I started small, giving talks at community centers and HOA board meetings. I created a checklist of best practices, segregation of duties, mandatory audits, background checks for board members, insurance policies that covered theft and fraud, transparent reporting systems. The response was overwhelming. Within a few months, I was consulting with a dozen different HOAs across Arizona. Some of them had already experienced fraud, others wanted to prevent it. All of them recognized that the problem was real and growing. I partnered with Linda, the new president of Riverside Meadows, to create a training program for HOA treasurers. We covered basic accounting principles, legal requirements, red flags for fraud, and documentation practices. The program became popular enough that we expanded it to other states. By the end of 2026, I had built a small but successful consulting practice focused entirely on HOA governance and fraud prevention. It felt meaningful in a way my previous work never had. I was helping communities protect themselves, helping honest volunteers avoid the nightmare I had endured. Sarah and I did end up buying a house together, a mid-century modern place in central Phoenix with no HOA. We joked that I had enough HOA experience to last a lifetime. But I stayed involved with Riverside Meadows as an advisor, helping the new board navigate challenges and maintain the financial controls we had implemented. The scars from the experience never completely faded. I still felt a surge of anxiety whenever I saw a police car. I still kept obsessively detailed records of every financial transaction, personal and professional. I still had moments of anger when I thought about how easily Rebecca's lies could have destroyed me. But I also felt stronger. I had faced a serious injustice and fought back. I had been vindicated not because of luck, but because I had prepared, documented, and refused to give up. I had learned that truth matters, that evidence matters, and that sometimes doing the boring work of keeping good records can save your life. Tom and I still played golf on Sundays. He loved to tell the story of the scandal to anyone who would listen, always emphasizing how I had outsmarted Rebecca with my bank records. I appreciated his loyalty, even if his retelling got more dramatic with each version. Doris became something of a community legend. At 78 years old, she was fierce in her defense of justice and transparency. She attended every HOA meeting, asked pointed questions, and held the new board accountable. She told me once that the scandal had woken her up, made her realize that complacency allowed corruption to flourish. The legal saga wasn't completely over. Rebecca's attorney filed an appeal, arguing that the evidence had been obtained improperly. The appeal was denied. She tried again, claiming ineffective counsel. That was also denied. Eventually, she seemed to accept her fate and focused on getting through her sentence. Dennis got out early for good behavior after serving 4 years. I heard he moved to New Mexico and was working construction. Rebecca still had several years left on her sentence. The insurance company that covered the HOA's liability did pay out a significant portion of the stolen funds, though not all of it. The community did end up doing a small special assessment, just $300 per homeowner, to cover the remaining shortfall. People grumbled, but they paid. The alternative was cutting essential services. I received a commendation from the Gilbert Police Department for my cooperation in the investigation. Detective Morrison told me that the case had become a training example for other officers on how to investigate financial fraud and the importance of examining alternative suspects. The media attention eventually faded, replaced by new scandals and controversies. But within the world of HOA management, the Riverside Meadows case remained well known. I spoke at conferences and wrote articles for industry publications. I became, somewhat reluctantly, a minor expert on HOA fraud. Sarah found it all amusing. She had never lived in an HOA community and couldn't quite understand the politics and drama involved. But she supported my work and understood why it mattered to me. We got married in the spring of 2027, a small ceremony in our backyard with close friends and family. Tom was my best man. He made a speech about how I had shown courage and integrity in the face of false accusations, and how those qualities made me a good husband material. Sarah rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. My consulting business thrived. Sarah's teaching career advanced. We adopted a rescue dog named Charlie, who loved hiking in the nearby desert preserves. I stayed in touch with Marcus Webb, the investigator who had been crucial in uncovering the truth. He told me that the Hutchins case was one of his favorites because it had a clear resolution. Too often in fraud cases, he said, the evidence is ambiguous, or the perpetrators escape justice. But in this case, the bad guys went to prison, and the innocent person was vindicated. I thought about that a lot. How many people in similar situations didn't have the records I had? How many were convicted of crimes they didn't commit because they couldn't prove their innocence? It was a sobering thought and motivated me to keep advocating for better protections. The Arizona legislature eventually passed a law requiring all HOAs to conduct annual independent audits and to carry insurance covering fraud and embezzlement. I testified in favor of the law, sharing my story and explaining why these safeguards mattered. When the governor signed it, I was invited to the ceremony. It felt like a full-circle moment. Riverside Meadows continued to thrive under new leadership. Property values recovered after the scandal. The community pool was renovated. The landscaping looked better than ever. New families moved in, many of them unaware of the drama that had unfolded just a few years earlier. I occasionally drove past Rebecca's old house. A young couple with 2 kids lived there now. They had repainted it and added a playground in the backyard. Life had moved on. I learned to move on too, though I never forgot. The experience had fundamentally changed me, made me more cautious but also more aware of the importance of standing up for truth. I'd seen how easy it was for lies to spread, how quickly people could turn against someone based on accusations alone. But I had also seen the power of evidence, the value of careful documentation, and the resilience of communities when they came together to demand accountability. In the end, that was the real story. That was not just that Rebecca stole money and tried to frame me, but that when faced with corruption, when confronted with lies and manipulation, a community could choose justice. People like Tom and Doris and Linda and Jeff could choose to investigate, to question, to demand proof, rather than accepting the easy narrative. And someone like me, an ordinary person who had just tried to do a good job as HOA treasurer, could survive an attempt to destroy their life by simply keeping good records and telling the truth. It wasn't a perfect ending. I never got back the months of stress and anxiety, the sleepless nights wondering if I would go to prison for a crime I didn't commit. Rebecca never fully acknowledged the harm she caused, and her apology letter felt hollow. But justice had been served. The truth had prevailed, and I had built something meaningful from the wreckage, helping other communities avoid the same fate. As I sat on my patio one evening in May 2027, exactly 2 years after Rebecca's arrest, I reflected on the journey. Sarah was inside making dinner. Charlie was asleep at my feet. The Arizona sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. I thought about that Tuesday morning when the police first came to my door, how my life had changed in an instant. I thought about the fear and anger and determination that had carried me through the investigation and trial. I thought about all the people who had helped me and the new purpose I had found in helping others. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. The HOA had just completed another successful audit, clean and transparent. She thanked me again for everything I had done. I smiled and put the phone away. The nightmare was over. The work continued. And life, complicated and messy and sometimes unjust, went on. But now I knew something I hadn't known before. I knew that truth, backed by evidence and supported by determined people, could overcome lies. I knew that one person's courage to fight back could make a difference. I knew that the boring, tedious work of keeping accurate records could save your life. And I knew that even in the midst of betrayal and false accusations, there were still good people willing to stand up for what was right. That knowledge, hard-won and tested, was worth more than any HOA budget. The sun dipped below the horizon. Charlie stirred and looked up at me with trusting brown eyes. Sarah called from inside that dinner was ready. I stood up feeling grateful for this simple moment, for the life I had rebuilt, for the justice that had been served. The story of Rebecca Hutchins and the Riverside Meadows HOA scandal would continue to be told, a cautionary tale and a lesson about vigilance and integrity. But for me, it was time to focus on the future, on the family I was building with Sarah, on the communities I was helping protect. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was Ethan Lancaster, not the guy who was falsely accused, but the person who had fought back and won. The person who had turned a nightmare into a mission. The person who understood that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply keep good records and tell the truth. And that, in the end, was enough.